In 2019, Walther revealed a gun that would break the mold of all striker-fired guns when they introduced the Walther Q5 Match steel frame. But lurking in the shadows was an up-and-coming brand not only serious about being a performer for competition, but also making it affordable. In this episode, I compare the Walther Q5 steel frame, the Canik Rival, and the all-new Canik Rival S. As I'd mentioned before, Walther challenged the status quo when they introduced the steel frame back in 2019. Since then, we've been privy to see many manufacturers challenge Walther in this area. Now, while in fact many are competitive, none have been as disruptive as Canik, largely because of their attractive price point. Why I chose to do this video is that these guns are related. Believe it or not, the Caniks are actually based on the Walther P99. Now, when the P99 came out, it was attractive, it worked well, and of course it looked beautiful, especially because the trigger back then is what stood out the most. It was crisp, it was flat, it was innovative for its time. And so what Canik decided to do is take that design from many years ago and improve upon it, while Walther went on a more innovative path, which was what you see in the Q5 steel frame. Now, while they are cousins, they still have one common denominator, and that is the fact that they claim to be competition ready out of the box. Let's jump in and see what these guns have to offer, both from an aesthetic and feature standpoint, as well as their shootability. The first gun I want to take a look at is the Canik Rival. Now, this is a polymer frame gun, so it is going to be lighter than the 3. Now, first thing you'll notice about the Canik Rival is how eccentric it looks on the outside. There are a ton of cuts, a ton of slide cuts too, to kind of reduce the weight on the slide. Everything meant to be functional and of course look good. You know, what's interesting is when I grab these serrations, they're incredibly functional, they're not just aesthetic, and so when you're just doing a quick rack like that, they actually do their job. And as you're kind of moving your way around the gun, I look at the grip of this, and when I grip it out like that, the one thing I would like to see more of is just a little bit more texture, as I feel that although they've intentionally put texture all around the grip, I would question its functionality as I find it fairly smooth. I do find it interesting that there is a backstrap that's adjustable and you can choose different sizes. The one thing I would point out, while they have these little diamond bumps on them, I'm not sure how effective they are when you're holding them. But all that to say is, I do like the ergonomics of the Canik Rival. I find that indexing it is fairly effortless. Now, at a gun at this price point, you start to think that there are compromises, and the first thing I would probably take a look at is the trigger. And so when you go to pull the trigger, okay, there's quite a bit of pre-travel here, but nothing hard, nothing bad. And you push the trigger down, just a little bit of squish here, but right to a nice firm wall, and it's a nice clean break with a very tactile reset at that. And when you think of it from a performance standpoint, it's nice to have a little bit of pre-travel because it does help you with trigger prep. That's what I appreciate about these type of trigger groups, is that when you go to it, you get a very nice firm wall and then it's a break. So if you're new to the game and you're learning how to trigger prep, that's a very big thing, because after a while you'll learn how to index to that point. You'll be able to get on the trigger quicker than you would with maybe a gun with more slop in the trigger. You're not going to be disappointed with the trigger, because I've seen a handful of guys work on these, but I would actually recommend that you can just run with it out of the box, because at that point it's more of a preference rather than a performance item. Now, the next gun I actually want to take a look at is the all-new Canik Rival S. The Rival came out in 2022, and its steel frame counterpart came out this year in 2023. This, when you grab it initially, feels like a much different gun than its predecessor, largely because of the all-new steel frame. Its weight is ideal. It feels very balanced when you're holding it and pointing it. And like the polymer, this gun just indexes fairly easy. The grip over the Rival is an improvement with the checkering up front, as well as the design of the back strap where it's integrated both side panels and rear. So you can put different grip sizes, and I'm gonna guess that they may be able to come out with a palm sole grip if you're looking for an aftermarket setup. So the one thing that's interesting too, you would think that the design is identical and similar, is the trigger actually seems a little different to me. So when I pull down to it, I get to that wall very quickly, but there's not very much sponginess to it, and everything is just slightly crisper. Now these guns have about the same rounds through them, so I'm not saying that it's from a break-in standpoint, as I feel it's actually intentionally designed that way. And so I started to take a look and see what was different. The thing that stuck out to me was the actual sear housing was made of metal in the Rival S. Now that's interesting because not even the Q5 steel frame does it have a metal sear housing. Now why I point that out and it's important is because now your whole entire trigger group has a much more solid foundation, and as a result, just that little minute detail results in less small movement that equates to a better trigger feel. In my previous video, I kind of harped on the serrations of this gun being a little bit hard to grip, and I still feel this way, but I want to attribute that more to the hard chrome finish. These do come in black, and prior to this video, one of the local guys bought a black one, and I was curious. So I went and press checked it just to see what it was like and play with the serrations, and I would say that it's a finish issue, not necessarily a design issue. I found that the black version was easier to grip, just like any of the other two guns at that point. So it's more of the finish of the hard chrome, so be aware of that if you do choose this finish. It might be a tad slick, but that's my observation. And so with that said, that now leaves us with the Walther Q5. What's interesting about this one particularly is this is a Pro model. Now you'll see I have an SRO optic on it. That's something I want to point out because the weight of this gun, if you're looking to shoot IDPA, this gun with the optic comes in at about 44.5 ounces, which is very close to pushing the limit of getting disqualified for being too heavy. Now what's cool is that the Canik Rival S with an optic on it comes in at just 43 ounces, so there's definitely room. You leave your gun dirty and guess what? You won't get DQ'd. Now that's something to kind of pay attention to with the Walther, is it does push the weight, but with the Steel Frame Pro, you end up getting a magwell and 17 round magazines. That is the difference. There's nothing different mechanically, not in the trigger or anything else about the gun. The grips are the same, it's just literally a magwell and 17 round magazines. When you go to hold this gun, it actually feels better in the hands. The gun is balanced and ideal, just maybe a tad muzzle heavy, largely probably because you have that weighted dust cover up front. It's meant to give you the right first impressions. Now, when you go to hold this gun, everything just feels quality. The fit is a little bit tighter than you would find with the Caniks. Now, as you hold it and grip it out, I find that the Index 2 is both strong, but I also feel that I have a much more positive lock on the grip on this gun. And a large part of that is you can tell Walther put more into the ergonomics and how this gun felt. You can see that just with the subtleties of how there's just indentations within the grip and the overall design. The one thing I will point out that I find that's interesting about the steel frame, and I've seen this complaint with other friends and I made this observation, is that the buckling inside of here is just a little broad, and you can really feel it on the top side of your thumb. I've seen friends even start to bevel that out a little bit. I wouldn't recommend that, and I'm not recommending you should modify it, but that's something to pay attention to. Now, seeing as how I shot the gun for 40,000 rounds, I ended up just getting used to it, and I never even noticed it once I got good with it. Now, one thing I want to point out that the Q5 steel frame does do in fact better is the actual slide release. So I find that when you go to hit the slide release on the Caniks, they're just a little slicker and they're a little bit more inside of the gun, whereas you could tell Walther thought that out and really made it this triangular stack shape so you could actually hit that fairly easy. Those are my initial impressions of the gun. Now, you're going to be shooting a lot, and so the one thing you should probably think about is a warranty. Now, this is assuming that you don't modify the guns and you just shoot them as is. The funny thing is I have quite a bit of experience with the warranty from Walther, and so I've actually had to use their warranty 3 times. Now, I know that may sound concerning, but it was only on one of my 3 Walthers that I had. Now keep in mind, between all of them, I have about 40,000 rounds, and the one that I kept sending in has about 27,000 rounds. And what happened with that is barrels would crack on it. I think that's more of an issue unique to it, and I'm not trying to stick up for the gun. That's just my experience because I haven't had it with the others. That said, the first time I had to use the warranty was around 10,000 rounds when the barrel cracked, and I sent it in and it took me about 3 weeks to get it back. So a large part of that was because parts were held up during the pandemic, and I can confirm that was made up, unfortunately, when I broke my second and third barrel. Now, while I find that to obviously be an inconvenience, what made up for it was the turnaround. Just my experience with the warranty is I'd file a claim, they'd send me all the information for shipping, I'd send it to the factory. Literally within a full week, I would have the gun back. So that means it takes 2 days to probably travel to Arkansas. They work on it, and in 2 days, they shipped it back. So that to say is the turnaround and customer service for Walther is pretty good. Now, I haven't had any direct experience with the Canik warranty, so I ended up doing a little research, and as I scouted forums and groups, I found that the average turnaround time was 2 to 3 weeks, with pretty much everyone being satisfied with the warranty work done to their guns. Now that we've had a quick initial impression of all 3 guns, now we're going to go out and shoot them and see how they perform. But before I do that, if you like this video, hit that like button, as that helps me in the algorithms. And if you subscribe, there'll be more great content coming out for more comparison videos and of course more about my shooting journey. So you definitely want to hit the subscribe button.
That fancy new gat.
It's a budget gun, man.
It's a sexy ass gun, and it really is. I'll admit I have some little gun envy going on.
I find that a lot of YouTube videos out there are based on how either a gun feels or they're just shooting at steel, but it's not really a depiction of the actual performance of the gun from a quantitative standpoint. You have the qualitative aspect that says, hey, the gun feels good, it shoots good, it's soft, and then you need to back that up with performance because maybe it feels good, but the gun is all over the place in terms of accuracy and precision. Now, all that to say is, wait a minute, who's this guy that's gonna shoot the gun? I actually shoot competition and practice it religiously, anywhere from about 3 to 4 weeks just in live fire alone. And just to give you an idea of where I am skill-wise, I'm an IDPA Master and a USPSA A-Class in Carry Optics. And for those of you not familiar with Carry Optics, it is the most competitive and largest division for both IDPA and USPSA. So I have to continually work at my craft, hone my skills, and improve myself nearly daily to be competitive. So all that to say is, I don't believe information out there is necessarily wrong. I just feel it's a tad more on the subjective side. And so by adding this quantitative component to it, I just think that will take the reviews one step further. Now that we're diving into this, it's funny because I actually started trying to do a big stage drill at first, and what I found is that it wasn't necessarily the best measurement of performance for the guns themselves, because that's more dependent on both how I enter, exit, and other variables that really don't highlight the strength of the gun, both whether it's splits, transitions, or even accuracy for that matter. And so with that said, I ended up just sighting the guns just to make sure that all the dots were zeroed on it, and I began with the distance drill of about 25 yards. At this point, what I'm paying attention to is both accuracy and precision. I guarantee you I'm going to get those rounds to go where I want them to go, which is accuracy. But it's interesting to stop and say, wait a minute, how precise is that group? And what we mean by that is, how small can we get the grouping on this over 5 or 10 shots? As I started to work through these, all 3 guns performed about the same for me. I can even show you comparison where the muzzle rise is even identical. And when I'm shooting at distance, I'm actually pinning the trigger back and letting the gun recoil naturally. If I were to stop it right there, I would say all 3 guns are fantastic. But this is why we go further and further. Particularly with a distance drill, you appreciate that nice wall that all 3 guns present, because you can find that wall predictably every time and keep firing and keep firing. The one gun that stood out as maybe not as ideal is the polymer. And the reason for that is because there's just a tad lighter weight in the gun, and so I have to work a little bit harder to grip it. But once I got there, I was producing about 3 to 4 inch groups like the other 2. And so the next exercise I want to talk about is strong hand only and weak hand. And the reason for that is because you have to intensely work harder to actually shoot the gun with just one arm, now that you don't have ideal grip. What I actually end up paying attention to in these is how easy they are to shoot, the return to 0, and recoil impulse. Now, as I started to shoot all 3, the 2 steel guns felt pretty good. The polymer, of course, I had to work more at it, but could I achieve the same results? Yes, because the return to zero, believe it or not, it was fairly identical in my hands. Now, that's why we take a look at it qualitatively, because yes, the recoil impulse was significantly more than the other two. And if we were to stop it there, we would say, well, that just because it doesn't feel ideal, it therefore is an inferior gun. But I ended up printing about the same groups with identical splits. Now, as I transitioned into the steel guns, I found that the return to zero was smoother. Where they stick out between the two is the qualitative aspect, and they both got their pros and cons in that sense. With the Walther, I found that returning to zero was smooth and steady. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that the ergonomics are designed so that I have an ideal grip on the gun. And for me, it was easy to squeeze off rounds and watch it go up and down in the dot and return to zero. When I went to the Canik, although that the dot wasn't tracking straight up and down, which is what I would prefer, that doesn't tell the whole story, because I found that the recoil impulse was actually softer than the Q5. The Q5 has more of a direct pulse to your hand. It's not bad, you'll still shoot it and think it's soft, but it's very distinguishable with the Canik Rival S. If you've seen my other video, I have very positive opinions on how soft shooting this gun is. And when you shoot them all three back to back, you really see how soft this gun really is. The real performance starts to shine when you start to do doubles, because in what we do, we shoot almost every target with 2 rounds each, so learning and mastering doubles are critical. This is when you see the guns run at the ragged edge when you're just aiming at one target. And so for this drill, I did a series of back-to-back doubles. And what I end up paying attention to here is how consistent can I keep my grip, how tight are my groupings, and even the splits. The polymer at this point, I know I'm gonna have to work harder. And as I started to push more and more, I was rewarded with tighter and tighter groups, but I had to put a lot of effort to get to that point. And it was probably about the third string in where I was creating about 4-inch groups with about anywhere from 16 upwards to 21 splits. I know that's a wide window for that range, but that's at 12 yards. And more and more I pushed it, the better and better the grouping got. When I first did my groups, they were about anywhere from 6 to 8 inches with a couple flyers. When I jumped onto the Walther, I felt confident, and my split times were a tad more consistent, anywhere ranging from about 18s to 21s, with my return to zero feeling immediate and the dot feeling smooth when I would shoot it. And the thing is, I didn't have to work as hard to produce identical grouping as I did with the Caniks. So at this point, I'm a little more consistent and producing tighter groups with less effort. So the added weight does produce a tad more confidence and does actually help with a little bit of recoil mitigation. Now, what's interesting is I hopped onto the Canik Rival S, and if you saw in other videos, I was able to really squeeze off very fast splits, with the other positive being that my adaptability to the gun was immediate. And that translated on here on this particular drill as the consistency is what stood out. I literally, in my first string with probably about my match speed, pulled off the following splits: 17, 17, 17, 18, 18, within 100th over 10 shots and 5 splits. My mind was blown, and so I went to give this thing 100%, and that's when I saw the mistakes starting to happen, is that my splits became inconsistent, more in line with the polymer. So it's strange, with the polymer I have to put a ton of energy and effort to maximize it, whereas both steel guns I don't have to put as much effort. I would say with the mechanical precision of the Rival S, I was able to produce a consistent set of splits, and consistent splits translate to better results in a match over the course when you add them up. Now I had a final drill here, and so for this one, I still wanted to do some transitions to this because it is about the balance and of course accuracy, which is why I started to go with USPSA scoring, because you can have a fast time, but if your accuracy is not there, it's not worth it. And so this is a measurement of both transition, splits, and of course accuracy. And for those of you who are not familiar with USPSA hit factor scoring, basically you add up all the points based on the certain zones within the target and divide them by your time, and the highest hit factor wins. And I want to actually share the actual individual strings just to see the performance of all three, and here they are. And so the targets are about 10 yards on the far wide targets, with this one in front of me about 5 yards. And so it's a good range of both wide and close, so I can practice throttling and also really emphasize what we can do to push the guns. With that said, this is where we end up results-wise, okay? When I tally up everything with the Canik polymer, ended up having 12 alphas, 5 charlies, 1 delta. And when you calculate that all up, that adds up to 76 points. With a total time of 9.01, my total hit factor was 8.435. Now, when you total that up, you want a higher hit factor to really determine the balance between accuracy and speed here. So, with that said, with the legacy gun, the Walther Q5 steel frame, I managed to do that with a total of 64 points because I had 8 alphas, 7 charges, and 3 deltas, so I was pushing it. And a total time of 8:47. So I was quicker than the Canik Rival. I think a lot of that had to do with my confidence in holding the gun, but with that said, because I had all the deltas and less alphas, it resulted with 7.556. So the Canik Poly actually beat this gun out. So now we'll go to the new Rival S, okay? And I've been a lot more comfortable pushing that gun with this drill. Now, with that said, our hits were 11 alpha, 5 Charlie, 2 Delta for a total of 72 points. So not as high as the Canik polymer. I think a lot of this too is because I wanted to slow down and get my hits, is what it felt like for me on the polymer version. But with the Rival, I was a little bit more confident, especially as the gun gets a little bit heavier. You can feel that you can push it a little bit better. Now, with that said, not my highest accuracy score, but it was my fastest time indeed. And when you balance that out, so you take 72 and divide it by 8.28, I had a hit factor of 8.696, making this the winner for today's shootout. So with that said, those are my thoughts out here on this. I'll go back to the studio and finish this wrap up. Now, when you look at the results on paper with my grip and my experience, I'm able to extract more performance out of the Canik Rival S. And for all of those wondering what ammo I used Blazer 115 for all 3 guns. A little bit hotter so I can see the subtle differences between the guns, and I actually have to work harder to do better with it. All 3 of these guns are fantastic guns to shoot out of the box. And I'll get to which gun I prefer today. But it's worth saying these guns are meant for different people. Not necessarily that one is better than the other. And I would say with the Canik Rival, this is a gun that if you're new to shooting, you're just curious, this is the gun for you. Because you're gonna grab this gun, you're not gonna need to do anything to it, aside from maybe buying additional accessories that may be more tailored to you. But at the price point, it's so attractive because usually a price where this gun sits at would be kind of a natural deterrent to say, oh, am I sacrificing things? I would say that you aren't sacrificing much. Yes, you are gonna have to work harder to extrapolate performance out of the gun. But that's also great if you're new to the game, you don't want to spend a ton of money on a gun, and you want to get your fundamentals better. Because if you learn how to shoot this gun better, all these guns become easier to shoot. So if you're a new guy and you're really curious about competition shooting, don't want to spend a ton of money, this is the gun for you. And I would say that the Q5 steel frame is still a very relevant gun in this day and age. The gun that this person is for is someone that likes quality, fit, and finish. I will tell you, after 27,000 rounds, they hold up pretty well. Or here's a video of my friend Kevin playing with my gun that has 27,000 rounds. And I literally just gave the gun and said, hey, what do you think of it?
Kevin, how many rounds do you think that gun has through it?
So I have a similar gun, the same gun. Oh, that's smooth. I would probably guess less. I shoot a lot. I would say probably less than 1,000 rounds.
Less than 1,000 rounds.
Less than 1,000. With the way the trigger feels, just with the tightness of the gun. I mean, there's no slop in that slide. It's smooth as butter as you pull the slide back. Everything's really tight.
What if I told you it had 25,000 rounds through it?
That'll be hard to believe. If I bought this gun from somebody online and they said it had 25,000 rounds with it, and it arrives at my doorstep, and I fondle it and I shoot it, I'll be ecstatic.
So longevity is there, the performance is there, great warranty. You getting this gun, you will not be disappointed in the ownership of it. Regardless if you end up paying more money for the Walther or you go with the lowest cost option, you're not going to sacrifice performance. However, everything is about confidence, and the all-new Canik Rival S has really pushed that benchmark up, and I think this gun is going to disrupt a lot of competition and also bring in new shooters to the game, which is what we want. Now, with that said, who is the Canik Rival S for? It is a softer shooting gun. It offers more consistency. Those two ingredients create confidence. Confidence creates great results. And so this is for the person that says, you know what? I think I want to spend a little bit more money on ammo and I want to go win matches, because when you actually look at the price between these two, you can actually invest a little bit more time at the range for what the difference in these two cost. And so I would say if you're both a serious competitor and on a budget, this is going to be the one you win with. Now, it's very obvious probably where I'm going to lean at this point. It is the Canik Rival S. It's soft shooting, it's consistent, and it has been reliable for me thus far. Those are the ingredients that lead to match wins. Not the most expensive gun, but the gun that creates the most confidence in your hand and has consistent results. And that for me is the all-new Canik Rival S. So with that said, keep shooting and we will see you at the range.